Up until now, we have worked with XML files only for the layout that we were designing so far. But there are some other XML files in Android that we are going to take a look at this video. For instance, let's switch to this project pane. In this resources folder, in this values folder, there is a XML file called strings.xml. Basically, this is the file that we should keep all of our static strings. This is very helpful if we want to localize our app for different, for example, countries. For example, let's create a string value in here. We can simply type a string in here inside this tag. We should name it. I'm going to name it Apple. In between these tags, I will pass the value of my string. For example, in here, I'm going to simply say Apple. But why we are defining our string from here and not our Java code? There are some advantages of this way of defining strings. For example, if we have users from around the world, from different countries with different languages, we want our app to be localized to their language. We can benefit from this way of defining our strings. Let's create another XML file in here and see what I mean. Okay, by here, inside this values folder, new value resource file. I'm going to name it exactly as the one in here, strings. But inside this pane in here, this little window in here, I can choose this locale and add it to this pane in here. In here, I can choose different languages. For example, let's say German. Inside this resources tag, I can define a string. I will name it exactly the same as I named it in this strings in here. I'm going to call it Apple. And for the value in here, I'm going to pass the Deutsch value of Apple. For example, let's say Apple. Now, if I want to use this string in different languages for different users, I don't need to specify anything. For example, let's give our text view in here an ID. Let's say text view. Now in our Java code, we access to that text view as before. Private text view, text view. Now I can set the text of my text view to that string that I just defined. For example, let's say .set text. But in order to access to these folders, to this file in here, I need to say get strings and pass the ID of that specific string in my string resources. For that, I'm going to say r.string.apple. Now, if I run my application, if the user's device's language is English, it will show the default string in here, the default value for our Apple. And if it's German, it will show this Apple in here. Let's run our program and see what I mean. Now, because the device's language in here is English, it's showing me the default value of my string, which is Apple in here. And if I want to change the device's language in here, for example, let's go to settings and change our device's language. In this system, and language is an input. Let's add German in here. Or Deutsch, German or Deutsch, those are the same. Let's make it default. Now if I run my program once again, I can see that I'm getting the German value of my string, which is apple in here. And if you notice in here, when I define two different strings.xml file, it will create a folder in here and place all those strings in this folder. And Android is smart enough to know the user's language and will show the user the same language in our strings. And also, if you notice, whenever we set the text of some text view or edit text or some view in Android to some string, for example, this text view, let's set it manually in here. Android Studio will show me some warning in here. And it says it should be defined in my strings. If I press Ctrl F1 as it suggested me, it says that for the translation purposes, it's better used to define it in Android resource settings instead. So for localization, if you have different users from different countries and different languages, it's always better practice to define your strings that the user is seeing in these strings.xml file and not manually pass them in the Java code because it will be much easier for localization. Okay, the next XML file that we are going to take a look at is these colors. We can define some custom colors in here as well. For that, we can simply create a color tag in here. We can name it, for example, let's say blue. In between these opening and closing tags, I can pass the hexadecimal value of my color, which I can get from Google simply by saying HTML color picker, as you can see in here. From here, from this slide, I can choose whatever color I want. For example, if I want a light blue, I can choose the color that I want and copy this hexadecimal value from here and paste it in between these tags. Now I have a color named blue and can use it wherever in my application that I want. For example, let's change the color of this text in here. From this text color, I can pass the address, and as you can see, the first one is add color blue, which add color refers to this colors.xml file, and blue is the name of my color. Now it's a light blue. Okay, the other XML file that I'm going to talk about is this styles in this values folder. This is basically the theme of your app, the style of your app, or different activities. You can customize these styles as you want. For example, let's copy and paste this. In here, I can name it differently. For example, let's say customized app theme. And let's change the color accent in here, its value to some another value. For example, let's say blue, the color that I just defined. I want some of my activities that have this theme, this customized app theme, instead of this general app theme, which this color accent will be blue instead of this dark red. Or I can change this parent from here. For example, let's see others. I have some options in here. I can try different versions of them, but I'm not going to do that in here. Or I can simply write all of my style myself from the beginning and then pass it to whatever activity or even in my general application I can pass them which we can pass in the manifest, which we will talk about in a few minutes. The other XML files that I'm going to talk about are menu files. For example, let's close all of these. Inside this res folder, I can create a new directory, new folder. Basically, you can create a new folder in your Android view of your project by creating a new directory. I'm going to call it menu. It's important to call it menu. In this menu folder, I'm going to create a new menu resource file. I'm going to call it main menu, or you can name it whatever you want. By clicking OK, in the text view, I have an XML which has an opening and closing menu tag. Inside these tags, I can define an item tag, which I need to pass a title, at least a title. The title is always necessary. For example, let's say settings. I can pass an ID. For ID, I'm going to say setting menu. I can pass an icon. I don't think I have one. Let's pass this IC launcher in here. Also, I can pass something called show as action. It means that where do you want your menu item to place. For example, if I choose this always, it will switch to the app bar, to the toolbar of my application. And if I choose never, it won't be shown in there anytime. But if I choose this if room, it will place it up in there if there is some room. For example, in smaller screens, it will depend on the size of a screen. Okay, I can close this tag, or I can simply close it by a slash. Let's define another item in here as well. The title is necessary. For the title, I'm going to say new note, for example, ID. I'm not going to define an icon, instead show as action, and if room. If there is some room, place it up in there. Now I can access this menu file from different places in my application. For example, let's pass it in this main activity. For that, I can come to this main activity. Let's delete this text view.setText that we manually defined. In here, I can override some methods. For that, I can press Ctrl O, which will pop up some window in here. I can see that there are different options that I can choose. There are a lot of them actually. The one that I'm looking for is on create options menu. I can type it on create options menu, and by double clicking on it, it will override this method for me. This is the method that will populate or inflate the menu item for this activity. Let's delete this return super.onCreate options menu, which is doing whatever the parent that we override the method from is doing. Instead, let's create our own menu. For that, I'm going to import some class called menu inflator. Basically, it is the class that will inflate our menu. I'm going to call it inflator is equal to get menu inflator. There is some pre-built inflator in Android that I'm going to use that for in here. Okay, now let's say inflator dot, there is a method called inflate. The first item is the address of this main menu.xml file, which I'm going to pass r.menu.main menu, the name of our XML file. And the second one is the menu, which we are receiving from here, from this onCreate options menu. This is the input of this method. Okay, after that, when we inflate it, we are going to return true. This is a Boolean method which needs a true or false value, which when we inflated our menu, we will return true. Now, if we run our program, we can see that we have two different menu items in here. But how do we handle the clicks on these menu items? Well, there is another method that we need to implement. For that, once again, Control O to see this dialog. For that, I'm going to say on item on option item selected, this one in here. Double click on it to override it. This time I'm going to keep this return and we'll talk why. Let's create a switch statement which will act depending on this item.getID, get item ID. We will receive the item that is being passed to this method and we will act depending on that. And in case we are going to address these IDs from here, these items. For example, this setting menu, in case it's r.id.setting menu. In here for now I'm going to simply show a toast message which will say settings selected, and then we will return true. This is another boolean. In here the output of our method should be boolean, so I need to return something, true or false. In case it's r.id.new note menu item, another toast message, let's say new note selected. Once again return true, and as our default case, let's return this statement from here. We are not going to care when the click is not on one of our menu items. We are returning whatever is happening behind the scene. Okay, now if we run our application, we should see the toast messages. If I click on this settings selected, on this new note selected. These attributes that we just defined in this main menu.xml for these items were only 4 of the available attributes for menu items. If you want to take a look at a list of them, you can come to this page at official Android developers website at developer.android.com, and as you can see in here, you have a huge list of options available for your menu items. Uh, Take a look at this page if you are interested, but mostly you will be working with only these 4 attributes. Okay, I think this video is getting a little bit long. In the next video, we will continue our discussion on different XML files. See you in that next video.